Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank the Portuguese Competition Authority for the really great honor to be a keynote speaker and talk a little bit about challenges posed by big tech to competition policy. I'd also like to thank the audience for not leaving, at least for the time being. So what I'd like to do really is, the title that you have in front of you is slightly different from the one that was previously announced, but really to talk a little bit about the challenges that are posed by the big gatekeepers, the big platforms in terms of competition policy. It's a new reality in many different ways, and both for legal scholars and for economists, and that's more like the perspective I'd like to talk to you about. This does present different challenges from what we had in the past. And so specifically, I would like to go through 5 points. First, explaining that, yes, there is a difference. There are many similarities, but there are also important differences of say, the new economy, quote unquote, of the large gatekeepers of big tech. And then I'd like to go over 3 different areas where those challenges are present: collusion, abuse of dominant position, mergers and acquisitions. And finally, time permitting, just make a few additional comments of what I think are interesting current challenges for competition policy. So with no further ado, what really is different about digital markets? Well, there's so many things. I'm not even sure where to begin, but I'll have to begin somewhere. And I would say that uncertain business models. Let me just start with an example. In 1998, Sergey Brin and Larry Page, then graduate students at Stanford University, went to Alta Vista. Does anybody in here remember Alta Vista's search engine? Maybe some of that. Okay, you're just dating yourselves. Okay. So they went, the dominant search engine at the time. So they go to Alta Vista and say, listen, we're trying to finish our thesis in computer science, and we have this company, Google, we have this search engine. We're not sure exactly how it's going to work, but we think it could be good, and maybe you guys want to buy us. You may not remember what price they were asking. They were asking for $1 million. $1 million, which for two starving graduate students was, of course, a small fortune. But in retrospect, I mean, how many zeros were they off? I mean, 10 to the 6 maybe off of their real valuation. Now, Alta Vista did not accept the proposal, as you know, and so we lost 2 PhD students. They never finished their PhDs. The rest is history. Reason why I'm bringing this up is clearly Alta Vista did not know what they were looking at. But equally important, and perhaps even more important, I think Sergey Brin and Larry Page did not have any idea of what they were talking about. They did not know what Google was going to be. And we read all these stories about, you know, hindsight 2020. People say they don't know the visionaries. All these people were absolute visionaries. Visionaries, my foot. I mean, in most cases, people, they really don't know. And they have no idea what's coming next. There's a lot of uncertainty about what the product is, what the market is, what they're going to be able to do, and so forth. And I think this is different. This is very different from the cement industry. I mean, we've had cement for millennia, and we will continue to have cement for many, many more centuries. So I don't think I'm saying anything that you didn't know, but I think this is an important element to take into consideration when we're looking at competition policy in these markets. And the other points in this PowerPoint, they're all very related to this one, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, except for mentioning the last one. It's also very difficult in many of these markets to correctly and precisely observe firm actions. Earlier in the previous panel, we were talking about, briefly, someone made reference to algorithms. I mean, how do you measure actions, strategies, firm moves based on algorithms? I mean, they're very difficult. Of course, you observe the results, but to infer actions from results is extremely difficult. Whereas in a more traditional market, yes, there are secrets, there are business secrets, but by and large, one can observe firm actions and firm strategies. Whereas in this world, it's very difficult to see what's under the hood, as it were. There's a lot of digital technology that's very difficult to measure directly. And that is, I believe, a huge challenge both from a legal and from an economics point of view. So that was my introduction, and what I'd like to do next is really to see in slightly more detail how this specificity of big tech raises a number of challenges in the areas that I mentioned. By the way, I mean, I'm just looking at the glass half full or half empty or whatever you want. Of course, there are many, many different ways in which, and I'll talk about that a little bit, many different ways in which it's the same. In fact, you know, foreclosure is still foreclosure, bundling is still bundling, collusion is still collusion, and so on and so forth. So in some ways, it's business as usual. It's the same type of behaviors that we've observed for many decades. But I'm emphasizing the novel element that many of these industries have, okay? Okay, moving on. So these are the three areas that I'd like to now talk a little more about: collusion, abuse of dominant position, and mergers and acquisitions. So let me start with collusion. This is very fresh. So this slide is very fresh. This is from the recent case that the FTC is putting forward against Amazon, and this is from the redacted complaint that was just made public recently, and some paragraphs that called my attention. And I mean, this is, for me, this is really great for the classroom. I'm going to use it in my classroom pretty much in the next few weeks. So this is where Mr. Wilkie, I forget his first name now. Anyway, he's talking about Amazon's pricing algorithm, and he's saying that, well, the goal of the algorithm is that it enables Amazon to avoid a perfectly competitive market. This is what we usually call collusion, avoiding a perfectly competitive market, benefiting shoppers but competing away profits. Now, I'm not sure exactly how this is going to benefit shoppers, but anyway, that's the way he put it. And basically, you know, when you explain that in greater detail, it's basically using quote-unquote game theory. It's a price matching kind of algorithm. If any rival is to lower price, then our algorithm will match that lower price, and eventually to the penny, and eventually they will learn that, and as it concludes, Mr. Wilkie predicted, that prices will go up. So I'm not sure exactly why in paragraph 327 it says that consumers will benefit, and in paragraph 328 that prices will go up, but that's just a small detail. Now, some of you in the audience may say, okay, we know that. I mean, this is a facilitating practice. We know this for so long, so what's new in here? Well, in a way, you're right. I'd say what's new is that until last week when I saw this, I didn't know that. I mean, I might have suspected, but I did not know that Amazon actually had programmed this in their algorithm. So this goes back to what I say, it's very difficult to observe behavior just based on the externally observables. So that's one first reason why I think it's difficult. And the second one is a few paragraphs later, they argue that this was one important tool for them to basically foreclose Jet. So Jet.com was a potential competitor that Walmart acquired to try and compete against Amazon. They did not survive. Eventually, they went out of business. And according to, by Wilkie's own admission, this was a part of the, one of the results of their algorithmic pricing strategy. Now you might say, well, this is not collusion. Now we're talking about foreclosure, which is something that we also know. Okay, so we'll come back to that later on. But my point stands that this is a challenge. This is a challenge for competition policy. It's very difficult to observe that. And I suspected this, but I only found out for sure very recently. But it gets worse. If you haven't read, I highly recommend a paper by Calvano et al. on algorithms and collusion. So here's what they do. This is experimental work, but I think it's extremely compelling. So the way a lot of these algorithms learn is what's known Q-learning, and I'm not an expert on that. It'll become very clear from what I'm going to say next, but anyway, I'll try my best. These are algorithms that basically work on the basis of brute force. We just try things and try, and we learn from experience. If I'm trying to maximize my profits, if my profits went up, I'll do more of that. If they went down, I'll do less of that. This is pretty much how AlphaZero works. This is how AlphaZero, within a few hours, I'm not kidding you, within a few hours can beat Magnus Carlsen at chess, starting from zero. So the great thing about Google's chess engine, AlphaZero, is that it starts from knowing nothing about chess other than the rules, which you explain in 30 seconds. And within a few hours of pure learning, just learning by brute force, it beats the world champion within a few hours. So think now about algorithms for pricing. They're trying to maximize the profits of the individual firm, which is exactly what we want them to do, competitive market. Well, the evidence is very naturally, as it were, if you put algorithms competing with each other in this form, they'll end up essentially learning how to collude. And they're learning how to collude not by human intervention. It's not like Amazon putting a rule, do this in your algorithm. No. The only thing that I do is maximize my profits, which is perfectly within the law. And the outcome is that they will collude. To me, this is an enormous challenge to competition policy. There are no smoke-filled rooms in here. There are no secret agreements. There's not even an explicit intention by the algorithm designer to collude. They're just saying, maximize my profits. And algorithms may de facto learn, quote unquote, how to collude. Huge challenge, in my opinion. And I'm not sure what the answer is, but I'm just telling you that I think this is going to be a big challenge for competition policy. So, and it's not the worst, it's not the biggest one, by the way, but it's certainly an important one. The biggest one is probably either going to be in abuse of dominant position or mergers and acquisitions. So let me move on to that now. And in fact, we already heard a lot about that today. So when it comes to dominant position, I think it's useful to contrast the United States approach to that of the EU/UK, which are similar in some manner. And I'm not telling you in here anything that you don't know. I mean, the US, after many years sleeping at the wheel, now, especially during the Biden administration, has been what I call the can and canter show. You just, go after everyone in every manner possible. I think this is a partial list of what's going on right now. DOJ has been trying everything on Google, from search engines to digital advertising to Android to app stores to everything. Various states suing Meta. By the way, various states are associated with DOJ on going after Google. The FTC versus Meta, FTC versus Amazon, that's kind of probably the most recent one, FTC versus Microsoft. And then, of course, we have private cases as well, of which, Epic Games may be the most prominent one. This is a partial list. So it's been a great show. It's not over, of course. It's still very much at its beginning. But at this point, what would I say about the Can and Cantor show? At some level, the issues are not different from what they've always been. So this is kind of the glass half full. There's nothing new in here. There's nothing new on the surface of the earth. It's all about aftermarkets, foreclosure, tie-in sales, bundling, et cetera, things that we've known for many, many decades. At that level, there's nothing new. But for the reasons that I already mentioned, there's a lot new. In particular, there's this thing that I don't know exactly how to define it, ecosystems, and I'm still looking for a definition. It's very difficult to argue from a legal point of view, even from an economic point of view, what this is. And my view is that either the agencies are not doing a good job at presenting their ecosystem story, or the courts are not buying into it, or both. But really, so far, the score is clearly in favor of defendants in here, in the Can and Cantor show. And my guess is that unless there's some significant reform on the US end of the spectrum, that it will largely be unsuccessful. I could be wrong. By the way, as a matter of disclosure, I have, for many years, have been completely on the sidelines, but recently I have been an expert witness to one of the plaintiffs in one of these cases in the Ken and Kenta show, specifically on the Microsoft Activision case. So I should have mentioned that earlier in my presentation, so here is my disclaimer. Okay. What about Europe? Well, Europe, it's largely about DMA and DMU, and I'm not going to say a lot about this, among other things, because we had really an excellent panel here before. I learned a lot, and I want to thank you for having come, and for the panelists, because it was very helpful. Just going to make a very quick note on English. I don't know why all of a sudden bespoke became such a common word in English language. I mean, it's a very old word, it's centuries old, but I checked on Google. The usage of bespoke increased by 10-fold in the last decade or so. Was that the Furman report? I'm not sure. It was something, but what's wrong with custom made? I don't know. Anyway, just a quick digression. But back to the DMU. I agree with the panel that I actually think I'm very reasonably optimistic, reservedly optimistic, contrary to many of my colleagues in the US who think that's just a joke, it's not going to work. Partly because it's very bespoke, it's very adaptive. And I think, well, is that a bad thing or a good thing? So here's an analogy that I was a bit reluctant to make, but I'm going to try that. This is a very risky analogy I'm going to try to make, because I don't know how much knowledge I can assume of refereeing in sports in the audience, but I'm going to try that. So, two very different sports, football and rugby. Now, everyone is familiar with football, so I don't have to say how referees work in football. That's the way we work. There's rules of the game, and then the referee will call, that was a foul. You're going to get a yellow card for that, or whatever. Rugby is a bit different. At least the way refereeing in rugby works these days, it's very difficult. It's very different, because rugby union, that's what I'm talking about in here. Because in rugby union, the referee is constantly talking to the players. And there's a combination of ex-ante regulation and ex-post regulation in rugby refereeing. Because the referee will go and say, don't go there, stay behind. You're going to be outside. Don't touch the ball. In other words, it's counseling the players before they do something so as not to have to call a foul. And of course, the reason for that is to make sure that the game continues to flow. And in fact, to me, personally, rugby union, when it's well played, is by far the most beautiful game on the world. It's poetry in motion for me. And that, to a great extent, is due to very good refereeing. So, I don't know how familiar you are with rugby union. If you're not, try to watch a game and try to follow how referees work in there. I think, maybe this is wrong, maybe this is completely stupid, that the DMA could very much be like rugby union refereeing, a sort of combination of ex-ante and ex-post regulation that keeps the game flowing in a better way than the more soccer-like approach, which is the current American one, which is ex-post regulation. Very litigious, of course. Even with a video-assisted referee, it's still not perfect, in my opinion. So, I don't know if this works or not, but I'm actually much more in favor of the European/UK approach to taking care of abuses of dominant position. Okay, third, mergers and acquisitions. This is basically the background. This is only GAFA, not including Microsoft. There's been hundreds and hundreds of acquisitions this century, and one might argue that much of the power that the big platforms have has been due not so much to internal R&D, but to acquisitions of either small startups or existing large corporations. And so there's been a variety of proposals to how to take care of this, this is only a partial list. It's a little biased based on proposals that I've heard from following the American scene, but between improving the agency's resources, giving the US agencies more power, more similar to what the European agencies have, A ban on acquisitions, and I think Senator Warren has been associated with that, reversing the burden of proof in mergers and acquisitions. So I'd like to talk particularly about something that I've been doing some research on. I try to summarize that in a couple of minutes because my time is running out in here. I, in general, am sort of a fan of the approach that was first, maybe not first, but at least was proposed by the Furman report, which, trying to simplify in here, there's a proposed merger or proposed acquisition by one of the big tech companies. This could be something that adds value to the firm and adds value to the consumer because there's a synergy between the assets of the acquired firm and of the acquirer. On the other hand, this could be a quote-unquote killer acquisition. This could be a way of me avoiding a potential competitor. So we have to the best of our ability, we have to compare those probabilities. This is not so much about looking at HHIs and whatnot, because in many cases there's no market share, so there's no HHI to speak of. There's no revenue. Many times these startups don't even really have a revenue. They don't have a clear business model. This goes back to what I mentioned earlier. So this has to be a little guesswork in here, which, as I said, ultimately comes to what is the likelihood of this outcome, what is the likelihood of that outcome. Now, in the US and in the EU, and I believe in the UK as well, what you then do is you compare those likelihoods. Is it more likely that this will be the elimination of a competitor, or is it more likely that it will be adding value to the firm? And I know very little about law, but my understanding is that the current legal understanding is that you balance those probabilities. And what the Furman report said that, listen, just to balance probabilities is probably not right because you have to also to take into account what consumers or what the economy has to gain or to lose in each of those outcomes. And the foregone benefit from killing a potential competitor may be huge compared to the benefit of value-adding a startup acquisition. And so you have not just to compare those probabilities, but we have to balance the harms. Of course, that proposal did not go through in the UK for a variety of reasons, and I'm not sure I completely understand that. My research, what I did was just try to calibrate a model and try to see in terms of numbers, and based on the distribution of acquisitions in the past 20 years, what we're talking about in here. And my estimate is that the gain from switching from balance of probabilities to balance of harms would be enormous. Enormous. By the way, and the loss from having a complete ban on mergers would also be enormous. So I'm sort of a big fan of the UK approach as proposed by Furman, not the one that eventually was adopted. In the meantime, I spoke to people at the Australian Competition Authority, and my understanding that at least in Australia, there is a provision for when comparing probabilities, not using 50-50 as a threshold, which would at least go in the direction of what the initial Furman report proposal would be, that if you weigh things by the harms that each possible outcome would produce, then you would use a threshold that's not 50-50, but rather small. In other words, if the likelihood that this would be a killer acquisition is more than, say, 15-20%, then we should block that merger. By the way, that's what my numbers show. It's about 20%, not 50. Okay? So I'm running out of things to say. I'm also running out of time, so the things go hand in hand. So just a few additional issues before I conclude. First, globalization. People already talked about that, at least in the previous panel. From an economist's point of view, it seems to me that one potential problem with globalization is over-enforcement. I know you said that, there's been under-enforcement for so many years. Why are you so worried about that? What I'm worried about is, in particular when it comes to mergers and acquisitions, and the reason why I say in particular when it comes to mergers and acquisitions is, if Meta wants to acquire Giphy, it's enough that one jurisdiction blocks the merger for the merger to be blocked. You cannot merge in the United States but not merge in the UK. I mean, that just doesn't work. And so I think this is something that we should probably think a little bit about. I don't think right now it's a huge problem in merger analysis because, like I said, there's been probably, most likely, under enforcement in the merger space. But take that into account. And this also applies to regulation as well. In particular, now that we have private enforcement in Europe, it's becoming more and more common. I think we run a serious risk of over-enforcement. And, I'm not particularly, I'm not defending any of the large platforms, but if I put myself on the shoes of Meta or Google, it's something that I might worry about. The second point is, when you talk to competition authorities, there's always a combination of legal scholars and economists. There's always, maybe a little bit of infighting in the air. Should they have more lawyers? Should they have more economists and so forth? In the big scheme of things and looking at big tech, economists and lawyers are very, very similar. They are very different, however, from geeks, from people who know about the technology. And I think this is probably a time when, in the balance of things, agencies should seriously invest in technology. If you have a chief economist, you should have a chief technologist. Okay? Because a lot of the things in here are trying to understand what's under the hood. And it's stuff that you need someone who knows the business in and out to get a good understanding of what to do. Third, competition authorities, competition policy in the past, in the 20th century, I think had a relatively easy time explaining itself to the public, why we exist, why we should exist. Because the way we explain to people, listen, you want to pay lower prices, right? Yeah, well, we're here to help you. I mean, how do you explain that in the context of search engines? I never had to pay a cent for a search engine. Why you say you're helping me? You're just making life hard for Google, and Google, they're my friends. They gave me search for free. In other words, it's very difficult to explain indirect effects. It's very difficult to explain to people that if you paid $150 for a pair of Nikes, 10 of those dollars went to Google. And I think that's one of the tasks that economists and competition authorities in general have to do. By the way, this is not just about big tech. When it comes to the credit cards, you already have to make that. What's the big deal about credit cards? They're so convenient for me. In fact, they even give me points. They give me frequent flyer miles. I don't get it. Why do you guys let them go? I mean, they're actually the good guys. It's a difficult task for a competition authority to make when you have two-sided or multi-sided markets. And so this is going to get worse, not better. It's going to get worse. And then my final point that also kind of difficult is the public in general is starting, if they have complaints about Google, it's not about the fact that they have to pay for search, because they don't. It's about privacy, it's about political power, it's about fake news. And the thing is, what role do competition authorities play in here? Probably none. But again, from a PR point of view, I think this is a huge challenge to explain that, listen, my role is to do this, and believe it or not, I'm actually trying to help you, the consumer, even though it's sort of like taking a dog to the vet. How do you explain to the dog that you're actually helping them? But you are. And I think this is a big challenge that that competition authorities have probably not properly tackled so far. Okay, I am running out of time. This is my last slide. I left it empty because I really didn't know how to conclude my presentation in a kind of nice way. So let me just do that by saying that, paraphrasing Dickens, this is the worst of times, it's the best of times. I really think that, yes, to some level, big tech is the same problems that we always had in competition policy, but they come with a different variation. So like the flu virus, this comes with a new variation that we still haven't quite learned how to fight. And for that reason, it's, I think, exciting times, both for legal scholars and for economists as well. Thank you.